So please be mindful if you're more mindful of your online presence, or if you'd like to um, be more private with your online identity, feel free to adjust your name or perhaps turn off your camera. But we'll appreciate questions and participation during the discussion. So make the session your own again. And a few other things as well, in addition to the housekeeping. I think I've mentioned a few. So introduce yourself in the chat box. Use the chat box to introduce yourself, to ask questions, or if you'd like to share resources or maybe react to a certain portion of the presentation. In case you forget to ask it during the Q&A, you can do so during the session. And yeah, type comments. And also, if you'd like to surface your questions privately, you could text me or Cameron in the chat box. And I think that's a little bit in terms of the housekeeping. We can get started with a few introductions from the MFN. I think I'm seeing a lot of new faces. So welcome to the MFN. We're a network formed by New Narrative back in December 2022. A little bit of introduction from us. We're a network. We're creating a network for people in Southeast Asia who care about freedom of expression, NGOs, students, journalists, independent media. We're trying to connect all of us and to create platforms for us to improve the safety and security of independent media workers, promote gender equality, empower collective action by media workers. And we do these things mainly via events. So currently, we're trying to do one event per month. Last month, we did an event on data journalism. And the month before, we did an event on what's happening in Indonesia with regard to several new laws that are endangering free speech in the country. And so for this month, we're talking about AI. It's a very relevant topic, especially since many of us are accessing it, and it's widely accessible right now. But also because of the threats that we have heard, toward media freedom. So hopefully more topics to come as well from the MFN. And if you'd like to learn more about us, collaborate, you could visit our website at Cameron. Oh, next slide, please. Yep, this is the MFN webpage, newnarrative.com/media freedom. If you'd like to learn more about us, we're open for collaboration as well. And yeah, hopefully more to come in the next few months for the MFN. And that's a little bit about us. That's great. Let's get straight into the session with an introduction of our honorable speaker tonight, Dr. Jean Linistinko. Cameron, next slide, please. Okay, thank you, Cameron. Dr. Jean Linistinko is a human rights activist from the Philippines and serves as Manushya Foundation's digital rights advisor. She authored Balancing Progress and Human Rights: Is Thailand Ready for Artificial Intelligence That Respects Human Rights? The report was published, I believe, in December 2024. And I think Manushya held a discussion on that as well. So we're excited to share with you people of the MSN, people who signed up via New Narrative, more to share with you more about the report, and also her work in the field of technology and human rights was acknowledged in 2022 when she was awarded by the Women in AI Ethics WAIE as one of the top 100 women in artificial intelligence ethics globally. So we're very excited to have you here, Dr. Jean. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'd like to definitely learn more about the report and what do you think AI, how do you think AI is affecting media freedom in Southeast Asia? Take it away, Dr. Jean.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Yeah, so my name is Jean, and I am here today representing Manushya Foundation. I know that the session is about media freedom, but I was also asked to talk about the report, which is about AI in Thailand. So the first part of the presentation will focus on the report, and then we go on the media freedom on the latter part. But I will not bore you to that on the laws, because that was you can read that on the report, and that was the main um, I guess, contribution of Manushya in the discussion. And thank you for showing up, because that means that you're interested and you care to talk about freedom, justice, and you care about what it means to live in a society where power is held to account. So this session moves away from speculation on so-called AI as some future danger, because it's already here. It's already shaping the conditions of labor. It's already shaping our access to information, our our ability to uh, protest, and our basic rights. So it's already being used in Southeast Asia to monitor, to extract, and to silence, and not equally, not randomly, but in ways that track power and reproduce inequality. And we have to stop thinking about technology as neutral, because it doesn't exist outside of material conditions. It is a product of them. It is built, it is trained and deployed by actors with interests. And under capitalism, those interests are not freedom or dignity. They're interests of control, accumulation, and profit. Technology is shaped by the logic of accumulation. Tools are not developed because they are necessary. They are developed because they can be monetized. So we get AI for ad targeting, AI for predictive policing, AI for worker surveillance, because those systems reinforce this existing hierarchies and open new frontiers for profit. I had a session, housekeeping or welcome, but I will skip this because it was already done. But I just want to um, acknowledge the context of where the context I'm sleeping in. Speaking in. We are living in dangerous, deeply unstable times. You know, around the world, we are witnessing the resurgence of fascism. We are seeing the erosion of democratic space right right in front of our eyes. And we are watching in real time as countries and corporations bend to reactionary politics, enabling surveillance, censorship, and repression. We're also witnessing genocide, conflicts deepening across borders, and global system that continues to value power and capital over human life. And none of this is separate from the conversation that we are about to have. Because when we talk about AI, media, and digital infrastructure, we are not talking about technical problems. We are talking about political struggles that are unfolding across every layer of society and whose outcomes will shape what kind of world is possible. So let's begin. So why is this conversation important? Why do you care, Jane? Well, for one, this technology is already embedded within our systems, whether we like it or not. It's in our welfare system, in our policing system, our media platforms, our border. It's already making decisions about people. And most of the time, it's making those decisions in ways that are invisible, that in ways that are unaccountable and unchallengeable. Governments around the world are rolling out this technology without real public oversight. And companies are building powerful systems with no meaningful guardrails. And the dominant logic is to still make it fast, make it profitable, and deal with the fallout later. We hear all the time that AI can reduce labor, and it's true. It can. It has the potential, only if people actually control how it's used. And right now, it's not being used to free people. Capitalism creates conditions for its own crisis. It's being used to surveil people, to manage us, to wring more productivity out of workers while cutting jobs, dodging taxes, and deepening inequality. And this technology is being used to police the poor, to monitor the migrant, to silence dissent, to automate censorship. And while that happens, tech firms, authoritarian governments get stronger, get richer, and more untouchable. But let's not forget who makes all of these possible. It's not the trust fund baby. It's not the venture capitalists. It's the workers, mostly in Global South, who label the data. It's the gig workers who train the model. It's the community under surveillance who absorb the harm. But those same people have no seat at the table. They're locked out of policy. They're locked out of governance. The labor is extracted and their rights are ignored. And that is why this conversation matters. Because if we do not fight for the public good, if we do not organize, if we do not regulate and transform it, then it will keep reinforcing the systems of power that we've been resisting for decades. Technology will not liberate us under capitalism. It will be used to tighten control. So why is AI a human rights issue? Let's get clear on one thing from the start. Most of what gets called AI today is not intelligent. It is not sentient. It is not thinking. It's maths. It's prediction. And what we're really talking about is large-scale machine learning. And these systems work by detecting patterns in data and making statistical guesses about what comes next. They simulate language, they simulate judgment, but they don't understand context. They don't understand harm, and they don't understand humans. When people say that AI is hallucinating, the model is not dreaming or glitching. It is doing exactly what it was built to do: predict the next word, the next image, the next outcome based on what it was trained on. If the design is flawed, the decisions are flawed. And these are the features of the system. And that's what where the human rights crisis begins, because these systems are increasingly used to make decisions that affect people's lives. It affects who gets a loan. It affects who is flagged as a security risk, what content is censored, what content online is scrapped, what services you're eligible for. And all of that is happening behind closed doors with no meaningful transparency, no public accountability, and no way to contest the outcomes. So this is less of a technical question, but more of a political one, because it is about power. Who builds the system? Who trains it? Who profits from it? And that's why when we say AI is a human rights issue, it's because the harm is real and because the system reflects the priority of those in control, not the people affected. This, this quote from Emily Bender and Timnit Gebru is exactly what AI is. It cuts through the hype. These large language models do not understand language the way we do. They stitch together words based on probability, not meaning. The system doesn't know truth. It doesn't know harm. It doesn't show when it's lying. It knows what sounds right based on the training data. It can only mimic. And mimicry without accountability is dangerous because it makes it easier for institutions to say, oops, sorry, the AI did it. And these systems don't challenge power, they replicate it. Also, we need to name the structure. Under neoliberalism, governments are trained to prioritize markets over people. The Reagans and the Thatchers of the world taught us that. So AI becomes a tool for growth, for efficiency, for profit, but human rights are just an afterthought. Maybe even a footnote in a strategy paper or a consultant white paper that they release once a year, or twice, if we're lucky. And when they do talk about rights, it's usually about the right to self-regulate. But history has already shown us what that gets us. We've seen sweatshops and data farms, troll farms, and profit extracted are often at the cost of workers' lives. And at the same time, we're seeing biometric systems, facial recognition systems used to monitor and suppress undesirables. And that's not a coincidence that refugees, racialized communities, and political dissidents are always the first to be scanned, the first to be tracked, flagged under the guise of national security. It always happens that when governments want to increase surveillance and manufacture consent, surveillance is packaged as either protecting children or protecting national security. Just those two. So, how is Thailand doing? Now we go into the report. This is where the legal analysis comes, and I know that this may bore some of you, but it's just a few slides. So Thailand is stepping into the AI race, but doing so in terms of doing so on terms set by global powers. Now, the United States and China have defined the pace and direction of this race, locking development into framework of geopolitical rivalry. And for countries like Thailand, the choice isn't whether to join, but how. Yeah, and Thailand, the Thai government has released strategies that looks very ambitious in paper. A 20-year vision focused on infrastructure, talent pipelines, competitiveness, but the substance is where the reveals the limitations. Because human rights, social protections, and democratic participations are absent. And in 2019, there was a national ethics guidelines, which was voluntary, it was weak, and it was drafted without participation from those mostly affected, workers, civil society, marginalized communities. They're not invited, and what we got instead was a top-down technocratic document designed to avoid regulation, not enable it. And more recently, just 2 months ago, the government resumed effort to legislate AI with public consultations and, of course, the announcement of the AI Governance Practice Center. But a lot of questions about enforcement, about oversight, and right protections remain unanswered. Now we move to the report. The report is a human rights analysis of the laws that may be relevant for the adoption of AI. As I've said, you didn't, of course, come here for the legal analysis, but here we are. And so our report is not a measure of Thailand's capability to build data centers or training more engineers. That's what separates this report from other reports that analyzes the capability or the readiness. Because when they usually assess a country's readiness to adopt certain technology, it's based on numbers of data centers, number of engineers. So it becomes a checklist of infrastructure goals or technical benchmarks. But what it does, or what this report does, is asking a harder question. Is Thailand building a future that respects human rights or one that automates their erosion? Because most existing AI readiness frameworks, even the ones from the UN and the OECD, treat development as a race to optimize. They track bandwidth, economic competitiveness, talent pipelines, but they fail to account for how the system affects real people on the ground, especially workers, migrants, the poor. And for this, we use a tool called Human Rights-Based Policy Impact Assessments, or HRPIA. And that framework shifts the center of the analysis from by asking if the system, by not just asking if the system works, but asking for whom. So it looks across legal systems, economic structures, education policies, cultural dynamics to see whether AI is reinforcing inequalities or opening up new levels for justice. It also confronts the empty language of ethical AI that governments, corporations, and consultants living on the 20th floor of a building as empty language. And that phrase gets thrown out around in policy documents and corporate white papers, I've said a while ago, as if ethics were a matter of branding. And in reality, most of those standards are non-binding. They are designed to create the appearance of responsibility while avoiding any real shift in power. And that's why it's called ethics washing. So this is the QR code for the report if you want to actually read all those legal analysis, or you could just listen to me now. but it is. But I won't be giving you all the things that we have written there because that will be extremely long. So now, what actually is human rights policy impact assessment and why? And is it just actually human rights impact assessment that I just dress up with fancy language? Well, almost. The main difference is that this is a governance scaffold. Like it is meant to shape how AI is built, deployed, and policed with human rights as a non-negotiable foundation, not an afterthought. So it aligns more closely with worker-led technology governance principle. It's closer to that than it is to human rights impact assessment. Because a standard human rights impact assessment sits within the narrow procedural confines of corporate social responsibility or business and human rights that big corporations use to wash their hands. And I'm like, mate, Pontius Pilate would be ashamed for how many times you have washed your hands. We use this because I've said the usual framework care about infrastructure, efficiency, and whether companies have the right technical staff, but they don't ask who gets harmed and who is being left out. And these questions you see on the screen are the questions, not exactly the questions we ask when we're doing the analysis, but the gist. We also look at who is in the room when decisions get made. If AI tools are being built and deployed without working class communities, without ethnic minorities, without women, without queer people, then those tools are not neutral. They're reproducing inequality by design. And then, of course, there is redress because harm is already happening. People are losing jobs, people are being denied benefits, being watched, policed by automated system. And the question is, can they actually fight back? Are there independent bodies that listens investigate? Can people stop harm before it spreads? And that's what makes it HRPIA, because it's not about managing reputations, because that's what corporate responsibility does. Doesn't stop at asking if AI is ethical. It asks whether AI policies support the people most at risk or just serve those already in control who don't even pay their taxes. Because rights without enforcement are just decorations. So now, this is the legal analysis, and this is just 4 slides, and I will be very quick because I know you want to jump straight ahead to the media freedom, which is the point of why you came here. So quickly, Thailand's Personal Data Protection Act, which came into effect in 2022. It is framed as a landmark step towards digital rights, and on paper, it gives a lot of individual benefits, like the right to access, the right to amend, to delete, and to object to how their personal data is used. It also applies to both Thai and foreign entities processing data from people inside the country. But rights on paper don't guarantee protection in practice because the law doesn't reckon with scale or structure of today's data economy. It says nothing about how automated system ingests massive amounts of data to make decisions that shape insurance claims, that shape job applications, that shape welfare access. There is no legal requirement to assess harm before these systems are deployed. There are no mandate for oversight until after people are already affected. Because the core concept of freely given consent is vague and unprotected, and the law also allows data to be processed without consent under the justification of freely given, or sorry, of public interest. But it never defines what public interest means. So what the PDPA ultimately fails to do is to recognize data as a site of struggle, a domain where power is extracted, organized, and exercised. It offers individual remedies, but individual remedy is not enough. There needs to be a structural challenge to how data is gathered, profited from, and used to govern. Second one is the Cybersecurity Act. You can see that there is a QR code here. Manushya Foundation has a report that specifically focused on the Cybersecurity Act. That's the cover page on the left. And if you scan the QR code, that will take you straight. And if you want to read the full report on Cybersecurity Act. So basically, officially, the law is meant to protect against cyber threats. And in reality, it builds legal scaffolding for state surveillance. It gives authorities sweeping power to collect personal data, seize device, and track online activity, almost always under terms like national security and public order, but it doesn't define what cyber threat actually means. And that ambiguity gives a lot of room to label almost anything as dangerous. When we decide what situation can qualify as a crisis, it also doesn't need it can bypass warrants and seize your devices and access your data with no independent oversight. And that kind of legal structure shifts us into a permanent state of exception. If you read Buzan of the securitization theory, you see that moving language or the Speech Act puts us in a state of exception where a lot of existential acts need to be constantly done. And that's where rights, of course, get suspended. Then the Computer Crime Act, it grants the state broad authority to restrict digital content deemed harmful to national security and public order. So these categories are not clearly defined in the law, leaving them open to expansive interpretation. And that creates an environment where online uh, uh, um, expression may be limited not on the basis of clear, consistent legal standards, but through discretionary judgment by state authorities. Now we move to the AI ethics guideline, which I've already talked about a while ago. So this document is supposed to set the moral boundaries for how AI gets developed and used in Thailand. But again, it has no legal teeth, it's not binding, and it's not enforceable. It's a suggestion. The whole thing is focused on economic competitiveness. It talks about ethics like it's a matter of corporate goodwill, but companies are not going to voluntarily give up power just because government document says that it would be nice if they did. It doesn't ban dangerous AI system. It doesn't prevent facial recognition abuse or algorithmic discrimination. It just encourages ethical behavior, as if encouragement is enough when people's lives are on the line. Now, I said a while ago that there was a draft law that was circulated for comments, which closed on June, I think first week of June. So the law was expected to set out a framework to regulate the development and use of artificial intelligence. It talks about risk-based model, but not really. So I'll go on explain that a bit. So it creates two main risk categories. It says there is a risk called prohibited risk AI and high risk AI. And then the first one are systems where it's too harmful to be allowed of all, but there are no fixed lists. Then the high-risk AI, where a system could significantly affect people, but can be used if the developers follow a duty of care. Very interesting word. Using risk management frameworks. The law also affirms yes, the law affirms that AI is legally treated as a human-controlled tool. It also outlines user rights to explanation, contestation, and transparency, and promotes industry to copyright exemption for mining and sandbox environment for AI experiments. I've mentioned a while ago that those two risk model are just what they are because there are no specific technologies up front that it is specified. The draft law allows regulators to decide later what counts as prohibited or high risk. High risk AI providers must report serious incidents, cooperate with regulators, and ensure systems are supervised and auditable. But now, the problem with risk-based model for any technological governance, not just AI, is that it frames harm as technical probability, not a political moral certainty. When you measure AI risk against human rights, you're already conceding that rights are negotiable, that they can be violated, but only if the odds are low enough. And that approach turns the protection of human dignity into a statistical calculation. Risk-based governance pretends to be objective, but it is not. In reality, risk is assessed and defined by the people who do not bear the brunt of AI harms. Marginalized communities are rarely at the table when these risk thresholds are set. Their concerns are filtered through cost benefit analysis. For example, the right of privacy is almost always balanced, and this goes with a lot of laws that we see right now in the EU, in Australia, and in a lot of countries. Privacy is almost always balanced against the value of data collection. But what if the very, collection itself is a form of dispossession? Risk models don't ask those questions. They assume that the quantification of people is normal, and they only step in when it becomes too dangerous. But by the time something is considered as high risk, the harm is already embedded in the system. Rights should be foundational, not conditional. You don't assess whether discrimination is too risky. You ban it outright. And that's where a rights-based model starts. Now, another example could be an algorithm used in hiring. It may not be flagged as high risk because it doesn't guarantee discrimination in every instance. Or maybe they actually hired a brown person once and say that, oh, this is not really high risk because we're able to hire one that is doesn't fit the, like the whole cookie cutter. But when deployed at scale, such systems can reproduce classes, races, gendered exclusions across thousands of applicants. Risk models tend to miss this kind of structural reproduction because they are engineered to detect acute failures, not chronic inequality. Risk-based models also lacks historical memory. They don't ask who has always been at risk in tech systems. Migrant workers, domestic workers, trans people, the disabled, the poor, the sex workers, their experience are not exceptions. They are actually the canaries in the coal mine. And in risk models, they are treated as edge cases because at their core, risk-based regimes are not designed to empower people harmed by technology. And that's why you see heavy emphasis on audits, documentation, compliance, forms of procedural cover that let developers claim that they did their due diligence. And that's how companies escape accountability. They tick boxes, file reports, annual reports, cite their risk assessment, even as their system reproduce social harm. Now we move to the duty of care. The draft law doesn't define what sufficient care looks like, nor does it set mandatory requirements. That leaves it up to each provider to decide what risk looks like, how to measure it, and how much is acceptable. And regulators may guide them, but nothing forces compliance beyond paperwork and oversight. And the duty of care model is offloads the work of risk assessment onto the very entities that profit the risk system. It's like asking oil companies to set their own pollution standards, which, by the way, they did. They even told us that recycling will solve climate change, which is a big lie. We cannot assume that private actors will act in the public interest without public enforcement. Worse, the law doesn't give workers affected communities in determining what counts as harm. Because when we focus on care, we have to deal with the power relations that AI systems uphold, and that is racial profiling, wage suppression, surveillance of the poor. Duty of care does not question why this system exists or who benefits. It asks whether the harm was unintentional, and it just stops there. As long as the provider claims they assessed the risk and documented their compliance, they cannot be held responsible for structural harm. I also want to push back on the human control tool, which was mentioned on the last part here. On the surface, it sounds like it's a win, I'm like, oh my God, suddenly we are avoiding the dangerous fiction of AI personhood. That is actually good. No one should be able to say that the algorithm made me do it and walk away. Accountability must stay with the human beings and the institution that design, deploy, and profit the system. But the problem is that tool-based framing also functions as a legal and political blindfold. And what I mean by that is that it reduces AI to a neutral instrument. It's like treating it as a calculator or a chainsaw. and strips it off of the social and economic context in which it operates. Because once AI is treated as just a tool, you can avoid confronting deeper inequality. That AI systems are designed to serve existing hierarchies, often at the expense of workers, the poor, and the racialized community. And in the workplace, when AI is used to monitor warehouse workers, you probably have heard of that in the United States, predict who might unionize or allocate shifts based on productivity scores. The law says it's just a tool, a human's in control. But in practice, that control is exercised by an employer whose interests are to extract more labor, underpay their workers, and suppress unionizing. The AI doesn't make those decisions in a vacuum. It's built to reproduce managerial priorities, and it does so with mathematical efficiency. By calling AI a tool, and it is, but by just calling it a tool, we ignore how technological systems mediate and intensify power dynamics. We treat harm as a malfunction, not as a product of design. And in doing so, you depoliticizes technology. We make it seem like the problem is bad implementation rather than the political economy that gave rise to it. And this framing also precludes collective remedies. If AI is just a tool, what does it mean? The only solution is individual redress, complain, contest, appeal. You cannot say that this system should not exist. This use case is fundamentally exploitative because you cannot ban a hammer. You can only ask someone to use it more carefully. And that's how this concept neutralizes neutralizes the technology or the politics behind it. Now we go to where you most came here for, media freedom. Now we go outside of Thailand. We go outside of the report. Let's now we talk about media freedom. I just want to strip this concept down to the root of the problem. Uh, Media is not failing because of the internet or because of the apathy of the consumer. It is failing because under capitalism, journalism has no use if it doesn't generate profit. Under capitalism, the role of the press is not to inform the public or to hold power accountable. It's to sell attention to advertisers, drive engagement to platforms, and deliver shareholder values. Everything else is incidental. The crisis of media is a crisis of commodification. Journalism has been reduced to content, truth has been reduced to traffic. The newsroom has been transformed into a content farm, and as always, the first to go are the workers, the journalists, the editors, the fact checkers. They are replaced by freelancers, AI generated filler, or sometimes nothing at all. It's just a scrap, totally. And platforms like Google and Meta have accelerated this collapse. So what they did was the perfect capitalist media model. They extracted maximum value with minimum input. They siphon the value created by journalists without paying for it. They hoarded ad revenue. They shape what is seen, who sees it, and how it is monetized. And they do it all without ever needing to produce journalism themselves. And publishers are part of the problem. Because they're faced with failing revenue, most double down on the same logic that killed them. Cut costs, chase virality, dump investigations, and publish whatever will keep people clicking. Click, 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 click. That's why coverage today is dominated by spectacles, personal takes, celebrity news, Kardashian, Love Island, Big Brother, who slept with whom, and how many more and more and more controversy. Conflict gets click. Power analysis does not. Critical investigative journalism is unprofitable. Period. It takes time, it threatens advertisers, it does not scale, so what happens? It dies. It is about a system that structurally disincentivizes truth. Truth is not profitable under capitalism. And the media is owned and operated as a for-profit industry. That's why you see more and more media moguls spending on clickbaits. That's why you see lies as being the foundation of any recent electoral candidates, and AI just makes that easier. What we're left with is a media system that looks plural but structurally uniform. A few mega platforms dominate distribution. A handful of conglomerates own most outlets. Independent journalism is pushed into the margins. Precariously funded, often dependent on philanthropy, which is problematic on its own, or crowdfunding. This is the logical endpoint of base determining the superstructure. The economic base of ad-funded surveillance capitalism has reshaped the superstructure of journalism to fit its needs. So we want a media system that serves the people. The answer is not more innovation. The answer is not better platforms. The answer is decommodification, public ownership, democratic control, worker-run newsroom, community-funded platforms, media as a commons, not a commodity. Until then, journalism will keep decaying, not because people don't care, but because capitalism doesn't. AI didn't invent this problem, but it made it worse. AI is not the origin of the crisis. It is the latest weapon in an old war that we've seen as early as the industrial times, or even before that. The crisis of the media, the collapse of stable work, the commodification of human attention are not the byproducts of AI. They are the outcomes of decades of neoliberal structuring, financialization, and the race to bottom in labor markets. But as AI escalates, as it escalates the crisis, it automates not just labor value, it automates labor value extraction. It enables corporations to scale surveillance, the skilled professionals, and fragment work even further. And in the media industry, AI writes headlines, moderates comments, curate feeds, and increasingly generate entire articles where workers once negotiated wages, conditions, and editorial integrity. Now they're replaced or pressured to perform like machines. Now, it doesn't enhance productivity. This technology doesn't. It reshapes who counts as productive and devalues everything that receives quantification. And who are those? The artists, the investigators, the care workers. So, no, AI didn't invent the problem, it made it worse. Behind every so called intelligent machine is a supply of human exploitation. AI is often framed as clean, technical, and futuristic, but every chatbot recommendation system and content filter depends on invisible armies of low-paid workers, mostly in the global south. They label images, sort violent content, annotate faces. Often they're exposed to disturbing, violent, or abusive materials with no mental health support. Some are paid less than minimum wage of $2 back home in the Philippines. Many have no contracts, no bargaining rights, and no legal recognition. This is how AI systems function. Machine learning is not magic. It's human labor scaled and stripped of its source. If you've heard of Taylorism, it is basically this. But now, with a global reserve army of workers who are deliberately kept invisible, just like the factory workers back then that were made invisible to the consumer behind the brand, these workers now are made invisible behind the myth of the smart system. Now, this is my second last slide. And I want to talk about innovation. Today, innovation is dominated by a narrow set of interests: big tech firms, venture capital, and state contractors. These actors don't just build the tools, they set the agenda. They define the problems worth solving, they prioritize profit over public value, and centralize control over the direction of technological change. This, this concentration of power limits what kinds of future are even possible. Decisions about where technology is deployed in healthcare, in policing, in education, in workplace, they are shaped less by democratic input, but more by what will generate the most return of investment. Regulation alone cannot solve this. If the innovation pipeline remains dominated by firms whose core incentive is growth and extraction, no amount of oversight will redirect it toward public goals. We need structural alternatives. We need publicly funded research institutions with open mandates that don't put the research behind paywalls. We need cooperative and mission driven labs and shared infrastructure that support transparency, accountability, and long term public benefit. The future of AI shouldn't be left to those with the most capital, the fastest timeline, or the most influence over government contracts. It should be shaped by a broadened set of actors, scientists, workers, communities, who understand that innovation is not neutral. It reflects value, power, and priorities. And if we want technology that strengthens society instead of reinforcing inequalities, we have to rethink who gets to define what innovation means and who is it meant to serve. And lastly, if we want free press, if we want democratic communications, if we want to resist algorithmic rule, we have to go beyond regulation. We have to confront ownership because the truth is, you cannot have media freedom when the infrastructure of communication is privately owned. You cannot have democracy when the platforms, the pipes, and the protocols are engineered to serve ads, buyers, hedge funds, and surveillance states. We don't need better content. We need a new foundation. That means building workers run public community driven media system. It means tech that answers to people, not to shareholders. It means refusing the lie that corporate platforms are inevitable. They are not. The future of media, of AI, of democracy itself depends on whether we fight for infrastructure that serves the public good or surrender it to those who profit from control. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jean, for the insightful presentation. Definitely a lot to think about. I'm still, processing everything right now, and definitely a lot to explore, not just, regarding how AI works, but also the political economy of it and how it affects media freedom. Still a lot of questions, especially, when we talk about Southeast Asia. So we're opening the Q&A session now. You ended the presentation with a lot of time left. So uh, everyone is welcome to ask questions. Please raise your hand or use the chat box. In the meantime, I think we can use some questions from our end first from New Narrative. So one of the few things that we really wanted to ask you uh, was regarding the complicity of civil society. A lot of people, you know, a lot of us enable the sort of narrative on AI, how powerful it is as a tool, and how it makes work easier. But many of us aren't aware of what you've mentioned about the invisible labor, or perhaps the environmental impact of AI and things like that. So how do we deal with that kind of complicity, especially ethics washing?
Well, that's a very well. I think we can confront the complicity of civil society in ethics washing the same way we confront all forms of accommodation with power. And we can do that by refusing to be absorbed, by breaking the silence, and by recommitting to struggle. Because when civil society begins to mirror the language and the priorities of the very institution that it's meant to hold accountable, it becomes part of the machinery. It accepts invitation to sit on panels that have no power, and they use them as rubber stamp consultations that are already decided, or to bless frameworks that legalize exploitation, because that's just legitimizing it. It's because this is no longer just a co-optation of civil society. It's a betrayal because it cloaks harm in the language of injustice. It puts a human face on systems that are fundamentally inhuman and do so knowingly. Some NGOs, academics even, some human rights defenders are not being fooled. They are making a calculation of access over accountability, funding over freedom. And we deal with that by saying no. We don't sit at tables that have already served the meal. We don't lend our voices to reports that will be used to excuse repression. You have to call out the elephant in the room. And we don't confuse visibility with power. Just because they're offered you a seat at the table doesn't mean that table was originally for you. They're probably just looking for any other civil society who will take the bait. Instead, we build our space. We resource our movements from the ground up. We recognize with and for the people who are harmed, not just the ones writing policy in air conditioned rooms. We speak plainly. We name the collaborators. And we remember there is no neutral position when power is consolidating through technology. It's either you're enabling or you're resisting. Movements don't need permission to tell the truth, and you don't need institutions to validate your resistance. We need each other. That's for sure. We need discipline, and we need to hold the line, not for a seat at the table, not for a rubber stamp, but for the possibility of a different world.
Thank you, Gene. And it's interesting how you mentioned putting a face to, AI as well. It's not just algorithms or, codes, but also, people in charge of creating those codes and algorithms. And I think many have uncovered that as of late. Like, for example, I think a popular one would be how OpenAI has been, operating the ways in which they source data, you know, uh, very dodgy examples here and there. And I think that's, beginning to help people realize like how we need to be more critical. And I think at this point, that's the priority, but it's also, like you said, important to organize and resist. And that's what we want to explore here as well. With a second question that we have. You've mentioned a lot about uh, AI marginalized communities, especially LGBTIQ communities. You've mentioned in the report, I think there's a table regarding how exactly AI marginalizes the LGBTIQ community. But you also mentioned it briefly in the presentation. So more technically, I suppose, or more specifically, how can AI reinforce existing discrimination, and what safeguards can prevent this?
Well, AI doesn't invent inequality. I think as I've mentioned a while ago, it inherits it, it refines it, it scales it. Systems of power do not disappear when new technology emerge. They adapt. They embed themselves deeper, and AI reflects the values of those who build it, those who fund it. In a world already shaped by racism, transphobia, violence, AI becomes a mirror held up to the worst part of our social order. Because when you train a model on a history of exclusion, it learns exclusion. When you build predictive systems on criminalized communities, it reinforces surveillance. When you collect data without consent, it becomes another act of extraction. No different than land grabs or forced labor. And for queer people, for sex workers, for poor queer young people, this means being misgendered by biometric system. It means being flagged by content moderation tools. It means being uh, made more visible to the state and more invisible in policy. But the safeguard is not just diversity in data sets, because it's not better representation. It's power. The safeguard is political. Communities have control over whether AI touches their lives at all. There must be the right to say no. There must be a collective governance over data and not just privacy, but sovereignty. That's why we must fund tech initiatives that legislate, and we must fund tech initiatives. We must legislate against surveillance and profiling, especially for queer people. And we must understand that tech justice is justice for all because it refutes the role of society scripts for you and to demand something more free, more collective, and more alive. Systems don't liberate, movements do.
Thank you, Gene. And speaking of movements, we at New Narrative, the question that we always ask is, what can we do? You've mentioned legislation, you've mentioned organizing and resisting, um, and a lot of us, want to know what can we do right now um, as communities in Southeast Asia. And I see the third question, Kim. Um, we want to know what can we do right now, and what can we do to help protect vulnerable groups from harmful AI uses. What are these specific things that perhaps have been done in Thailand? I think Thailand have progressed with regard to AI legislation more than, for example, Indonesia and Malaysia. So, uh, could you tell us more about that?
I think one concrete or two, I think two concrete actions that media outlets or NGOs in Southeast Asia could take is to create and maintain first is to create and maintain a public watchdog registry that tracks and exposes harmful deployments, especially those targeting vulnerable groups. Because when you aggregate field reporting, leaked procurement documents, that registry would be a good help to build a collective memory of abuse. It would give um, affected communities a a tool to name and confront harm. It would also apply, pressures on policymakers who benefit from this opacity. And you could also, like instead of just documenting harm, another concrete action is to build community-run observatories, not just to react, but to shape the terms of AI deployment from the ground up. So an observatory would not only track harm, but actually set standards for what ethical community approved AI would look like in Southeast Asia. That would involve researchers, labor organizers, indigenous leaders, and journalists co-creating frameworks that reflect lived realities and not Silicon Valley templates. It would issue independent evaluations of state or corporate AI projects. It would flag systems that fail public interest tests and block their adoptions through campaign litigation and bargaining. Because we cannot just wait for abuse to happen and respond after. That is we need a proactive infrastructure for refusal, for consent, and for design. Because you don't get to impose machine governance without people. You don't get to decide what intelligence means or whose labor builds it. We will set the terms.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jean. Um, would like to open the floor for everyone. If you'd like to ask questions, and feel free to use the chat box, or if you'd like to raise your hand. But right now we have a question from Cameron. Cameron, would you like to uh, okay, I can read it out. The fact that so much critical infrastructure is now in the hands of private for-profit corporations and not governments is an especially worrying trend. The fact that tech companies now have their own submarine internet cables feels dystopic, and I feel is similar to the issue with AI being discussed here. Nevertheless, state-controlled infrastructure itself has its issues. I'm thinking of how governments were always able to tap telephone calls when telephone infrastructure was built, maintained, and operated by government and SOEs. Is the alternative really state versus private control, or do you think that there is a middle ground? Thank you, Cameron. What do you think?
Thank you. I think this is the wrong question if we're thinking in terms of liberation, because framing it as a binary between state and private that is a trap. Because both have histories of domination, extraction, and surveillance. One in the name of the profit, the other in the name of national security. But private infrastructure is not neutral. When corporations lay submarine cables, server or build server farms or dominate the cloud, they're not offering services. They're controlling the terms of the connection. They decide who gets access, at what costs, under what surveillance conditions, and whose political realities, um, our political interests. That's not public infrastructure. That's empire dressed in a clean UX and subscription plans. But replacing that with state ownership under current condition doesn't guarantee freedom either. States have long histories of repression, especially when it comes to communication. And as you said, government didn't hesitate to tap phones when they ran the networks. They still don't hesitate to use spyware on organizers, journalists, and those who are demanding a world beyond what we have today. But no, it's not about choosing the lesser evil between Google and the state. No, the answer has to be a structural transformation. Infrastructures, the cable, the satellites, the spectrums, the platform that must be reclaimed as part of the commons. So that means publicly owned, yes, but more than that, democratically owned, run by workers, accountable to communities, shielded from market pressure and the state repression alike. Because that's not utopian ideal. We've seen it before. You know, there are community mesh networks in indigenous territories, work around tech co-ops, free software projects rooted in solidarity and not venture capital, postal system that once served as the backbone of public communication. So we don't ask state or market. We ask who holds power, who sets the term, who decides what is built and for whom. Because internet will either serve the liberation or deepen control. There is no neutral ground. Yeah, you can type it.
Uh, can I might I think it might be easier if I just ask you directly. I mean, you sort of referred to it in your answer. Thank you so much, by the way. That's really a lot of food for thought. But I did want to ask, you intimated a bit, but what would be your utopic state of affairs when it comes to like the best way to have infrastructure, and especially like tech and communication infrastructure? How do you think would be the most ideal way that it should be operated? Like, what's in your imagination when you talk about that?
Well, I think a liberatory technological future doesn't definitely look like Silicon Valley with better manners. No, it doesn't look like state-run platform that mimics Google, but with nicer terms of service. It begins by dismantling the structure that treats human beings as data points and that treat connection as a commodity and that mistake control for safety. Because in a society that is liberated, technology is not built for profit or for surveillance. It is built to serve life. Infrastructure from cables to cloud storage should be collectively owned, democratically governed, and oriented towards care. Not like that duty of care. That means workers control the means of digital production, not just factories, but the algorithm, the code bases, the energy grids that keep it running. People are not profiled, tracked or scored. Facial recognition doesn't exist. Predictive policing doesn't exist. These are not just they're completely abolished because you cannot reform a system designed to target or to exclude. Um, Education is free, collective. It includes digital literacy, not to make people more employable, but to equip them to challenge power, to build alternatives, and to liberate themselves from algorithmic loop. Data, of course, is also not extracted. It's held in the commons, governed by the people it comes from, and never sold. So it's not about returning to a pre-digital past like 1990 or 1970 or something. It's about seizing the tools that we built, disarming them, and using the raw materials to construct something else. A liberated future is inseparable from the abolition of carcerality. Until those structures fail, or tech will always serve them. So the goal is not ethical innovation under oppression. The goal is to build power, and from there, build a world that we actually deserve.
Thank you. That's genuinely a really great answer, and I can actually even imagine it now, and I really hope that it becomes a reality. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Cameron, and thank you, Jean. We have a question from Shifa Shokina in the chat. It starts with digital ID, but an AI police state is possibly the biggest threat to our civil liberties. We have an army of super intelligent AIs acting for the government with immediate and constant threat of state violence against their subjects, us. In this context, how can resistance movements, uprisings take shape and occur in the future? And perhaps on a more personal level, how can we maintain hope?
Well, that's a difficult question, but I think Silfa is naming the contradiction at the heart of this moment, because what began as convenience, such as the digital ID to access to public service, it becomes a scaffolding for total surveillance, and layered with AI, it morphs into carceral infrastructure that doesn't need prisons to confine you. Your location, your association, your words, your patterns become data points in predictive model of obedience. Resistance becomes not only dangerous, but also algorithmically anticipated. And we've seen this before, maybe not with the same tools, maybe not with the same logic, but colonized people were fingerprinted, they were indexed. Enslaved people were tracked and patrolled. Activists were wiretapped and infiltrated. Technology has always been used to discipline those deemed unruly, the poor, the racialized, the insurgents. So the question is not whether resistance is possible, it's how it will evolve. And under an AI police regime, mass protests will of course become harder, become more risky, become more easily dismantled. But movements adapt, and we've seen that. We'll see how more decentralized organizing, encrypted coordination, and insurgent tech built by collectives who reject corporate and state platforms. Because resistance will embed itself in culture, in art, in daily acts of refusal, in your deletion of your Facebook account. Maybe that will be a good start, because those systems built to predict and preempt us, they will always fail to understand what makes human resistance powerful. AI can track patterns, but it cannot account for rupture. It cannot predict the courage of the people who refuse, who create care where there was only abandonment. It cannot compute love, grief, anger, the conditions that make revolt not just possible, but inevitable. Because as for hope, hope is not optimism. It's not naive belief that things will get better on their own. Hope is a discipline, as said by I forgot who said that. Uh, but hope is a discipline. It is a choice to keep fighting when the odds are bleak. It is recognizing that even under the weight of surveillance and repression, people will organize, will rise, will imagine other ways to live. Hope lives in the refusal to accept this world as fixed. You don't want that. I'm like, this world is not fixed. This world is not working for people like me, but working for people like Mark Zuckerberg. It lives in a world of underground networks, and it lives in us, not as a comfort, but as a commitment to see each other, to freedom, to a future where machines don't rule us, and neither do the men who built them. Yes! Oh my God! Thank you, Maria Kama. Yes! Hope is a discipline. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chifa. And thank you so much, Jean, for the answer. A really beautiful question and beautiful answer to follow it as well. Um, we still have room for a few questions, so any takers, feel free to drop in the chat box. Anyone in the chat? Jay, maybe? I think it says dinner time, so maybe he's holding on to a spoon at the moment. Oh, thank you, Emily, for joining as well. Oh, Michael, please do. Would you like to
Okay.
drop it in the chat? Or yeah,
No,
Ryan
no,
can
no.
also
I
speak
can
as well.
I can say it, but I'm not turning my camera on because I'm very comfortable having just eaten dinner. Gene, really amazing. Oh my gosh. Like I furiously took notes. It it's really a pleasure to listen to you speak. And there's so many action points, so many nuggets in there. And my question is this: we're not going to be able to change the system or the infrastructure overnight. The Metas and the Googles are still going to lay their cables across the ocean. Um, Refugees in the camps in the north of Thailand are still getting their faces scanned to get charcoal and food. What's one, two things we can start doing immediately to chip away at this? And I know it's not an easy question, forgive me.
No, it's not. Thank you, but you're right. We don't get to wish our way out of the system. Refugees are still fingerprinted, face scanned, tracked once before they fed. Biometric borders are here, and they're violent by design. So the question isn't if we resist; it's how, especially when immediate harm is happening now. Two things that I think we can do now is and grounded in material impact is to resource and build protection networks inside affected communities. So that means creating response teams with digital security tools, legal support, and public visibility. Because, for instance, if a refugee camp is being targeted with invasive tech, the first line of defense is not a policy change in Geneva or New York. It's people on the ground who knows what's happening, who can document it, resist it, and connect it with broader networks. It's the small NGOs working on the sides, on the grassroots, that looks like equipping frontline organizers with tools to scramble facial recognition, delay data collections, and expose procurement contracts through whistleblowing. And then we can attack the legitimacy of the system through exposure. The more the systems operate in the shadow, the safer they are. So we drag them into the light. That means naming the companies that profit from surveillance. Publishing the data sharing agreements, mapping the pipeline from humanitarian aid, showing which platform benefit or profit from Palestinian genocide, mapping the or show how which or we NGOs or journalists and academics we should stop sanitizing this system as innovation or our protection. They are extraction machines wrapped in humanitarian language. We call them what they are. They are carceral tech and make it politically costly for governments and NGOs to deploy them. We cannot true we cannot we cannot wait for a future. We are fighting in the rubble right now and building the scaffolding for what comes next.
Thank
Thank you,
you. That was great.
Michael.
Thanks, Gene.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jean. Um, I believe we still have a bit of time left for one more question. Um, yeah. If not, then I think we can end the session maybe with a few closing remarks from your end, Jean, especially uh, regarding how we can resist um, the threats, especially from AI, especially in Southeast Asia. I know you've answered my question regarding that, but perhaps when it comes to the issue of AI itself, it feels like there is a great deal of uncertainty and a great deal of knowledge that you have to sort of have to properly address it. And so it feels like when it comes to hope, it's also an added obstacle when it comes to resisting it. So any closing remarks on your end regarding that?
I'll be very, 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 very quick. We've spent this session. We were not speculating about the future. No, we were grounding ourselves in the material present, where AI is already being used to control. We've seen how laws built to manage risk actually manage dissent, how platforms extract value while collapsing the very conditions for free media. But if there is one thing I want us to walk away with, is that none of this is inevitable. The machine is not running on its own. It was built, it was maintained, and profited from by the people, which means it cannot be unbuilt to. The question is not whether this technology will shape society, because it already has. Now, the question is whether we will keep letting it deepen exploitation or whether we will fight to bend it towards justice. No diversity panels, no reform, but transformation. That means shifting power. It means public infrastructure over private platforms, worker led design, not corporate governance, collective refusal. It means remembering that resistance cannot live in annual reports or white papers. It lives in communities. It lives in organizing. It lives in the refusal to be automated out of humanity. We don't need more trust in technology, but what we need is more solidarity in struggle. Thank you very much.
Perfect. What a way to end the session. Thank you so much, Jean. It's been a huge pleasure having you with us, and hopefully, this can be a start of a deeper reflection regarding AI, especially in Southeast Asia, and how we can fight it and how we can battle the discriminations that it has, set against us. And may hope always live and live even in the face of technologies that try to mimic, real art and real hope and real resistance. Thank you so much, Dean. And before we end the session, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And it means the world to us if you can also fill out our feedback form, which my good friend Cameron has presented in the slides as well. You can scan the QR code, and I believe Cameron has put in the chat box as well. Thank you, Cameron. And let us know what you think about the session and what you would like to see in future sessions. Maybe other topics that you would like to explore, or current happenings that you would like to know more about, legal topics that you'd like to break down, or maybe how to improve your digital security in the age of AI. Please let us know your thoughts in the feedback form. And that's it for our session tonight. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a huge pleasure. I hope to see you all in future MFN sessions. And if you'd like to collaborate, if you'd like to know more about the MFN, feel free to reach out, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. That's very kind.